Welcome to the Atlanta History Center's virtual author talk featuring Saeed Jones and Kiese Laymon discussing writing about the South. My name is Dartricia Rollins, and I am an assistant director of Kara Circle, the nonprofit programming arm of Kara's Books and More, the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore, located in Decatur at Agnes Scott College. If you have never been to a Kara's event, you can see more on our website or follow us on social media. You can purchase copies of Saeed and Kiese's books directly from Kara's Books and More from the links in the chat to the right of your screen, and also at the links provided on the History Center's website. As Saeed and Kiese are talking, please submit your questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will try to get to as many of them as time allows. Saeed Jones is the author of Prelude to Bruise. The poetry collection was a finalist for the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award, as well as awards from Lambda Literary and the Publishing Triangle in 2015. His memoir, How We Fight for Our Lives, was winner of the 2019 Kirkus Prize in Nonfiction and was named one of New York Times 100 Notable Books of 2019. Saeed also just recently published a poem in the New Yorker about his mother titled A Stranger. Born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi, Kiese Laymon is a professor of English and creative writing at the University of Mississippi and the author of the novel Long Division and a collection of essays, How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America. He is also the author of the memoir Heavy. Please welcome Saeed Jones and Kiese Laymon.
Thank you, Patricia. How you doing, Saeed?
I'm good, love. I'm good. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Okay. So let's spend this time talking.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? The last time we were together, we were in Oxford, Mississippi, which is about 60 or 70 miles from where you spent a lot of your childhood in Memphis.
Right.
And it's also a part of Mississippi that I was completely unfamiliar with until 5 years ago because I grew up in Jackson. And you know, you were amazing. You were wonderful. You were voluminous. You were beautiful. But I wondered, were you scared given that reading in that space?
I was. I should say, as soon, and I think this is true for, bookstores are, at their best, I think almost like hallowed spaces. So certainly the moment I walked into like Off Square Books and, got to start meeting readers and meeting the booksellers, even before you walked in, I was like, okay, and then, certainly the conversation we had, there's something special, I think, about art and cultural conversations in places where that can't be taken for granted.
Yes.
And everyone there. I mean, just as an example, I remember during when I was signing books, because there's a wonderful MFA program there that you work with, and there was a new student who was queer and Latino, and he came up and he was from New York, and I was just like, I guess he'd been there for like a couple of weeks, maybe.
Right.
And I was just like, how are you doing? And he was like, I'm good. And I was like, no, really. Like literally, we were, like, how are you doing?
Right.
And he looked at me, and his eyes immediately started shining with tears.
Yeah.
And we just had a moment. So, and I think that really encapsulated my experience as a visitor. I was in Oxford for 3 or 4 days, and I knew why I was there, why I wanted to be there, and that remained true. But yeah, I was stressed. It was scary. There were rebel flags and all of that. I mean, even as someone who obviously grew up in the South and grew up in Texas, I wasn't in that kind of the South. That was not exactly, that imagery. And so, yeah, it was stressful. It was tense. I remembered that when I would leave my hotel, which was rare, frankly, like to go get food and stuff, I remember like I could feel in my shoulders the stress I was carrying. I wouldn't have AirPods in my ears because I was like, I need to listen. It was wild. It was wild. So I'm glad I went, and we can like keep talking about it. But yeah, it was not an easy trip.
Right. And then you left Oxford and you went to Jackson, right? Which is also a part of Mississippi. And all my people just kept telling me how amazing you were and how much they loved you and how much they wanted you to move to Jackson. But I wondered if that not just that South, but if that Mississippi felt any different in your body.
Immediately different.
Right.
It was so funny. It was so funny. Yeah, it was trippy, like it, I was like, oh, this is okay. This is just, to me, I felt like Jackson was like, oh, this is just Mississippi. Right. This was the aspect of Mississippi, particularly, growing up in Memphis, particularly in Whitehaven, where a lot of my family is, you can, go left and still right and end up in Mississippi without issue. So I was used to that, that kind of relationship to the state, mostly Black, mostly poor or working class, people just trying to make it. It felt like very different. Oxford felt to me kind of like Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Yeah. Like it really felt like, is this the seat of the Confederacy? Do they know? Like there was like a ghostliness that I kept thinking. And in fact, I remember texting you one morning. I woke up in my bed in my hotel room in Oxford, and without even thinking of it, I just said out loud, it's just so heavy here.
Oh.
And I was like, oh my God.
and you, I don't know if you remember or not, but you wrote something beautiful about.
I wrote a poem, yeah.
You wrote a poem. I don't know if you wanted people to know that or not, but you wrote like for me, like that. I've read that poem every week since you left, because nobody makes me do anything at this point in my life, but like that poem helped me love myself better in this space. And I'm interested though, like your book starts in Texas, ends in Barcelona. Lots of people who know you as a New York writer, right? Yeah. And now you're in Columbus. And I'm not interested as much just in like the spatiality of it, but I'm interested in like, do you have to work harder to love you? Do you have to fight harder to love yourself in geographic places? And are you in a space now, not where you love yourself, but in a place where you feel that you have the tools to really fight for your life and love you right now?
Yes, I mean, I definitely, and that is, I moved here to Columbus last September, and, every day has been like collecting the evidence to connect with the intuitive sense I felt immediately. The only way I can describe how I felt when I visited Columbus for work in October of 2018 and started thinking this is the place I want to live is that it's just like you're at a club with friends, just jacking around, whatever you're not trying to do, and you look across the room, you know what I mean? And there's that person. And if you're lucky enough to have that conversation with that person and you feel what you feel, it's not necessarily logical. There may not be a lot of evidence, but you feel something. And that's how I felt here. I felt a wholeness that now I'm like, oh, I'm starting to piece together all of the reasons why that's the case. But yeah, I mean, I think growing up, particularly in Texas and in the Bible Belt, and Texas has that relationship to the cowboy, to the American cowboy, which is a very specific kind of white masculinity, which is to say there was no opportunity for me to fulfill that. It was just never gonna happen for me. You know what I mean? Like, sure, I could deepen my voice and whatever, but at the end of the day, girl, it was like, whatever, It was like trying to be Marilyn Monroe or something. It's just like, yes. Baby. Just feeling so othered all the time, so on the spot all the time. I think I just have a really vibrant sense of what welcome for me feels like. And part of it is I travel, and I love traveling, and I write a lot when I travel. I wrote about half of the memoir outside of the United States, because I think when I'm traveling, I feel like I get to observe a little bit more, and like I don't know the language, so like whatever. But like here in the US, yeah, it's definitely been a journey to feel just totally welcome and calm. And though, in New York, I mean, I certainly felt like in a lot of ways I fit in, there was an intensity and exhaustion and a pride about that exhaustion. Like, I think in New York, you kind of have to be a workaholic to even fit in. that I was just starting to feel like I can't do this forever.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like moving here, part of the reason is that I feel both welcome and that I have found a pace of not just quality of life, but like a rhythm that feels like this is where I need to be, where I want to be.
I think the South is in some way like the cradle of mythologies, right? Like there are all these mythologies about the South. Yeah. And I think one thing I tend to do as a Southerner is mythologize people I love and mythologize people whose work I love, right? Mm-hmm. So I mythologize you. And one of the things that in the myth of Saeed versus the person of Saeed is that, and I want you to tell me that I'm wrong, what I'm about to say, is that it and this is what's so interesting about doing this with Karis books. So like anytime I've done an event with Karis, I've always felt bodily, like not just, I keep making this distinction in my work between safety and safeness, but like an abundance of safeness whenever I'm doing anything with Karis books. But because of how I grew up, I think I do this thing where like when I start to feel too safe, I kind of retreat, right? Like spatially retreat, emotionally retreat, bodily retreat. And it appears in the mythology that I have of Saeed that you seek the safeness. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of me is, okay. I think I look for, you know what it is? It's like, I love observing, and I love connecting dots, making unexpected connections between different threads. I'm a Sagittarius. I'm very much a journeyman. So one of my joys is kind of bringing this, I did poetry, but then I can work in media, and then I'm on Twitter, but then we can talk about the New Yorker. We can, I love all of that. In order for me to be able to do that though, I have to feel that I don't have like a sniper's aim at the back of my head. You know what I mean? Like that. So there is a kind of like, I think I do need a sense of safety, of safeness to be able to like think and to make those connections. I feel like when I'm home, one of the joys of being here, for example, is that like I feel free to make artistic and idea connections that are, really important to me as a person, and I hope in my work. Whereas when I was growing up in the South, whether it's, just coming of age in Louisville, Texas, in the suburbs, or visiting family in Memphis, Tennessee, I just didn't feel safe to like think out loud.
Yes.
And certainly not speak out loud, because I just always felt like I was being watched, observed, and evaluated. And we know that's the case. I mean, Black men, queer people, anyone who is, on the continuum from not being masculine enough, it's true. We are, consistently surveilled. So I think I aspire for safety, and I hope that what's birthed out of that is that I make other people feel safe or create temporary, like I hope this conversation, our conversation in Oxford at that bookstore, like a bubble. I know that it is permeable. I know that it's unfortunately not going to protect people, as they go on about their lives, but at least a respite, that's part of the goal.
And one of the things that I felt, Saeed, in that conversation was, I didn't know how to express it, but I'm sure my body expressed it. Like I was, the book had just come out. Like, as you know, I absolutely was mesmerized by what you willed yourself to do within the lines of that book, but also as a project, as an artful intellectual project. I was, and I am still amazed. But I had never felt so afraid for someone I loved who was an artist as I felt for you that moment, because you are Southern and you are queer and you are Black and you will fight, right? And the book had just come out. And I was just so, and a lot of it had to do with the space we were in, but I was just like, I wonder how I want the world to treat Saeed with love. And I doubted that, but I have to question myself, did I doubt that, or did I doubt your ability to fight the world's intrusion into what you do with your body, how you do it, and how you fight? But I wonder, I haven't asked you this, but like, do you feel like you made it to the other side of that fear that I'm sure you had to have a little bit of when the book came out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was really scared. I was, scared most days when I was writing the book. I mean, often when I was writing the book, I was worried for my family. I was worried about my mother in particular. I was worried about causing harm, in this book. That's kind of like how I got over, my own harms and traumas. Right. I was worried about inflicting harm and trauma on other people in the process.
Yes.
It's really hard to write an ethical memoir, as you know.
Right.
And then, when it came time to come out, I was like, oh gosh. I mean, it is still wild. I mean, white men have messaged me.
Yeah, okay.
White men have messaged me. I had to take a moment. White men have messaged me on Instagram, and I can tell when people are messaging me as they're reading the book and if they finished it. So, but they've been like, oh, I've gotten to the college scenes and it's just so hot.
Right.
The sex scenes with the botanist are just like, and I'm like, yo, like,
right.
Back up. So, there's been a little bit of that. And I was ready to defend the work. Because by the time I finished the book, I was like, damn it, I will fight to defend this. There's not a word in that book that I will not, do everything I can to defend the integrity of. But I gotta tell you, people have been generally just incredibly kind.
Yes.
And even people being like, those guys being like inappropriate. Like a guy sent me I hope he's not watching. A guy sent me a painting. Yeah. His interpretation of my relationship with the botanist, and it was uncomfortable.
Right.
It was still someone trying to make a connection, someone trying to bridge the gap in experience rather than fight me or deflect or dishonor my humanity, So I think the most difficult moments, the most challenging kind of moments have been navigating the vulnerability that I share with people, and that people tend to respond in kind, people will tell me, about their own experiences that resonate, or particularly with grief, and that's a challenge. But yeah, so it hasn't been like this. It's been more like, okay, let's breathe and let's figure out how to navigate this together, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
I would fight.
Right. I know you will. Shit. I know you will. But like bodily, when I went on the road for Heavy, and I'm a Southerner who wanted to come back to the South, right? But when I went on the road with Heavy and people started touching me and touching my stomach and saying shit like, oh, you're not big as I thought. Or, putting their hands all over my head. Like, I felt sad, I felt anger, but I also felt like I was taking part in some sort of transactional relationship, which is fucked up, right? I felt, okay, like they bought my book, they get to do these things to my body. And there's two things I want to say. One, when I saw you in Oxford, I was so happy to see you, fam. Like, I don't know, the hug that we had meant so much to me, but I also didn't want you to feel like I was infringing on your space, because that's what I felt part of my journey with Heavy has been. Right. Like people feeling that you write about the body, that like your body then becomes theirs because they bought it for fucking $20. And I'm glad to hear that's not your experience. Yeah. But that's been part of my experience. And retrospectively, because I was so happy to see you and to be near you and to love you, but I'd also just read your book so many times. In retrospect, I was like, damn, did I infringe on Saeed by holding Saeed so tight and so close because I needed to fucking like feel closeness? Do you know what I'm saying?
I love you so much. I love
you, fam. No,
we text, we talk, right. Our interaction is not just reading each other's work. You know, we confide in one another, and I needed that hug, I think, as much as you needed to give it, you know, for the reasons we've said. I mean, that's deep, the touch. I mean, I will say this, it's interesting, you know, part of it is I have a background in performance, and navigating spaces as a performer, I think, has been helpful. So I remember like thinking about how to handle those moments, because I'm close to writers like Roxane Gay, and I feel like there's a lot of parallels there and I watch people walk up touching her, and, you know, and it's like people go, like, I'm a hugger, and it's like it's pretty clear that she doesn't to do this. So I think I've, like, you know, like, for example, I have studied the Oprah strategy. Have we talked about this?
No.
I did this on the book tour. It was helpful. Oprah's thing is like when people come up and she can tell they're going to hug her, she will put her hands up first and grab them by hand. That's why she does it. Think about that image of Oprah. You know exactly what I'm talking about. That image of her doing this. This is her controlling. And she said eventually she figured out that's what she would do to kind of preempt the touch. But I think you're totally onto something. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, physically, I haven't had to deal with that. I do think, you know, particularly in terms of sex and sexuality, in terms of how I go there in the book, there is a familiarity that, particularly when people are like messaging me, you know, online, I think they feel a little too familiar sometimes. You know what I mean? And so but it's interesting. So yeah, for me, it hasn't been, I'm grateful that I haven't had to deal with those kinds of experiences. But it is, and it's always just going to be weird publishing a memoir, and then you're out in the world, and then strangers know so much about you, and you know so little about them as you're meeting one another. But that's wild. I mean, I think, I know you've spoken about, and I'm glad you have, about, like, writers being protective of ourselves. Is this part of what you've been getting to, like, with?
Yeah, I mean, because I don't have the I'm working on the skills, but I'm not, that's not what I'm not good at that. But part of it is that I was, you know, I grew up a fat Black boy, and part of it is that the transactional Southern part of it, right? It's just like there's a part of me that thinks that if somebody invests in me, I literally owe them. But the problem with that is once you know, my lines are, you can keep touching, but once you cross that line, I kind of pounce. You know what I'm saying? Instead of letting the boundary be where it should be. Do you know? So yeah, that's a bit what I'm at. I want to make sure we get some questions in while we talk. So one of the questions, and this is related to this, is in Saeed's book, he talks about the questions he wished he could ask about sex and relationships. When and where did he finally start getting answers?
That's a great question. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at, like, bitch, did I? Right. Sorry, my dog is here in my lap, and I laughed so hard. He was like, what's going on? You know, I will say the last 5 years in particular, and, you know, I'm 34, so, you know, if you've read the book, that's intense because the book ends when I'm 24, 25. I say the last 4 or 5 years because I have finally started having, like, close friendships with other queer men who are my age, other queer people who are my age, close best friends, you know. You have to, men are so, queer men included, are so competitive. And I think it's difficult to develop friendships when you look at everyone as, like, aren't we all competing for the same thing, which is a partner or a hookup. Anyway, through those friendships, I finally felt that I've been able to have the kind of vulnerable conversations to talk about transactional relationships and dynamics. You know what I mean? And to talk about, like, my deep fears. And the truth is, those close relationships and conversations have empowered me to have those kind of conversations with other people, you know? Right. And I think the other big thing is my friendship with Isaac Fitzgerald. He's my best friend. He's a wonderful writer as well. I think a lot of you know him too. you know, we are just so vulnerable with one another. We are just so emotional and like all the like touchy and cryy and talky. And I think through opening up with him, it allowed me to start, really it's like sunlight finally hitting a terrain, you know, after years and years of night. And you're just like, I didn't even know there were hills and valleys there. That's kind of what it feels like. So it's not that I feel like I have all the answers on relationships, trust me. But I feel like in the last 5 years, I've been able to say consistently, I can talk about it and I can have questions and learn, not just from reading, because I feel like, and for a long time, and you see this in the book, like I was always trying to learn about desire just from the writing and the reading, and that's great. But at some point you have to live it in a way that's not toxic.
Right. Somebody says I'm writing a memoir, and whenever I'm in a new place and writing in a public space, I steal the corner table where my back feels protected. Do you do that too?
Actually, that's funny. Yeah, I prefer to sit. Yeah, that's like a restaurant bar thing of mine that usually drives friends like Isaac crazy. That I'm like, I cannot have my back toward the door. Yeah, I mean, my happy place is like in Mexico City or Berlin, you know, sitting on the corner of a bar in some hotel, just listening to the conversation, even if I can't understand the language, and writing. So I get that. Yeah, I think for me, it's like when I'm traveling in other countries where I don't understand the culture or language very well, it's rich for writing because that energy, I can't make jokes, I can't be sarcastic or whatever, you know, that energy goes in. So right. I just write.
And, you know, I mean, that question is rooted obviously in trust.
Mm-hmm.
And
safety,
you know, yeah. Safety, right? And your book is just like, and like majestic exploration, a gritty, majestic exploration of safety. And, you know, to talk about safety, we necessarily should talk about Baldwin. But the tough question, and might be one of those questions I should not ask you in front of 100-something people.
Man, let's do it.
But I'm asking me too. It's like, do you think there are groups of people who should necessarily not trust you? Not individuals you've had relationships with. That's a separate question we can talk about. But are there groups of people who you think should not trust you? Mm-hmm. I'm saying that because I think there are groups of people who I think should not trust me. Mm-hmm. But do you feel that?
Groups of people that should not trust me. I can't imagine them, but I'm sure they're out there. I will say this. I restructured and became increasingly cognizant of how I wrote about young Saeed in the first act of the book. The book has 4 acts. Act 1, you know, you have to be like a cold-hearted, you know, motherfucker to not care about that iteration of Saeed. You know, right. He's thoughtful, he's lovable, he's just wide-eyed and, you know, whatever. And I really was trying to tell the truth, but also to establish a strong relationship with readers who might not identify with adult Saeed. Yes. Who might not be there for the ferocity, who might not be there for true queerness and messiness, to develop a strong relationship so that hopefully you would follow him as he went into, you know, the chapters that followed. I think because initially the book was going to open in Phoenix, Arizona, for example. Right. And I think for a lot of readers, and I would say quite frankly, the straight white women that the publishing industry values more than any other demographic, you know, I think I might have alienated and lost a lot of readers if that's where the story started. So like, I don't know if it was necessarily like trust, but maybe comfort, familiarity, you know, I think that was something I was cognizant of. I've got to figure out how to get them to care to go to these darker, more complicated places.
Right. You know, something you said when you came here, it made me think about this question, and I didn't want to ask it in that space, but you know, like I don't think trans folks should trust me upon, you know, me, not PSA deeply, but like the figure of me, right? I don't think queer folks necessarily should trust me. And I'm asking that question because I constantly get this question from white people about like, why don't you trust us and whatnot, and I want to invert it and say, like, I think there are lots of people who especially should not trust me. I mean, lots of people who I've harmed, especially, but people who people like me have harmed. And so it's interesting to say that you kind of don't feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I certainly don't think of Memoir Protagonist, myself included, as inherently noble or good. I don't think Saeed on the page is you know, always, you know, kind, because I have not always been kind. And I don't think of myself as a reliable narrator either.
Yeah.
That's why I try to honor in the book gaps in memory,
Right.
self-deception. So in that way, I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't take anything Saeed says on the page as gospel. You know,
Right.
I think the problem there is it feels like the kind of people who go to memoir, nonfiction narrators, protagonists for that are looking for someone to have all the answers to solve all the problems for, you know, and I think that's a dynamic that's not healthy, you know, and I know human beings are fallible. Like, we lie, we make mistakes, we tell ourselves stories that may not actually be what happened. Like, I just think that's inherent. And so that's just a value I have. And so I want to honor that on the book. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm dangerous to many people. You know what I mean? Like, you know.
Yeah. Somebody says, for both of us, when writing about your life, this is Leah Wickholm, incredible person. When writing about your life and people in it, how do you take care of yourself, especially when writing about something traumatic? I'm sure you get that question often.
Therapy. I was in a lot of therapy while working on the book, and I took a lot of time because, hi Leah, because I wanted to not just take the time to process and then create. I wanted to be able to write it, walk away, you know, sometimes for weeks or months, and work on something else and come back and make sure, for example, how I wrote about my grandmother or my mom or my uncle, that I still could stand by it, you know, and I think time was just really helpful. And then, you know, talking through it with close friends, I mean, was really important. I mean, you know, the section where I find out my mom's in the hospital in Memphis, and I end up having to fly to be there. The first time I sat down to write it, I did break down. It was the only time I like actually started crying while working on the book. Yeah, I'm a pretty cold writer typically, but I was a mess. I don't think I could finish a sentence. I just kept crying and deleting and trying to start over and crying. And I finally had to text a friend and I'm like, come get me. You know what I mean? I cannot just sit in this house by myself doing this. And we just like went and drank, you know, all afternoon, because I think sometimes you do need to step away. So, you know, it's a lot.
Can we talk a bit about the process of crafting the botanist sections? I mean, yeah, fam, like, can you walk us through that?
Sure. I mean, what's interesting, so the first time we meet the botanist, that first full evening, horrific kind of evening, I wrote, it was one of the chapters that came actually very quickly. I wrote it in summer of 2011.
Wow.
And I was being mentored at the time by Sarah Schulman, wonderful, wonderful writer and novelist. And Sarah is the toughest critic I've ever had. She's so tough. Ooh, she's so tough. She would just like read through and just rip me to shreds, and I go home and cry and then get back to work. But that was the one chapter she went, and this is good. And then she went back to ripping me to shreds. So I just kept it and was like, let me leave it. So it literally just stayed that way. And then as I got back in 2015 to working on the book, and I realized that to understand what happens in Phoenix, I need to go into the different iterations of these kinds of violent, hateful, relationships, I realized that my relationship with the botanist was more important. Like I really was not planning on writing about him as much as I ended up doing so. But it was just, it was a lesson for me, and it became a lesson in therapy where I was like, oh, wow, there's so much here, you know, because I go back. You know, and that was the aha moment as a writer. Because initially I wrote it, you know, the section that Sarah Schulman saw, it ends with the door slamming and the "don't call me again," you know, and that was going to be it. That was all I was willing to admit publicly.
Right.
But only as I was writing the book and I saw as a character how far Saeed had to go in terms of development to make sense to readers. What's going on in Phoenix? You know, I was like, uh-oh, we got to bridge that gap. And I finally realized, I was like, you went back to that guy. You went back to him several times. And you hated it every single time. And at the time, I didn't tell anyone about it. You notice in the book, you don't hear me complaining to friends about him. I didn't talk to anyone about him, you know? So it was even in, like, you know, part of the book, what you see is that you see me wrestling with, like, even when you can tell the story of what happened to you, it does not mean you control or mastered what happened or overcame what happened to you. You know, I think the botanist, the way he manifests in the book was that he was teaching me as I was writing the memoir that I had far less control and agency than even as I was writing the memoir, I like to pretend I had, if that makes sense.
Right. And you know, like there's so many sections in that book where I think we have to make the decision as readers, you know, do we love and trust Saeed, the character that we're getting, versus do we love and trust Saeed, the creator, the artist? And the first time you go back, that was one of the times when I really, really, really trusted you, the artist. You know, because the artist had to make that decision, because you didn't have to necessarily let us know. Now, if you didn't, it's a completely different book. Somebody says, I don't understand, why wouldn't trans people trust you? I don't think trans people should trust me because cis people treat trans folks like shit, and I am cis, so that's why.
You're like historically, far more reasons why you should not trust me than reasons why you should.
Yes, that's why I said yes. That would be the answer to that question. For both of you, what other rituals and habits do you have to help you feel safe, especially in times like today, when even going outside can feel unsafe? All right, let's pivot there. Yeah, let's pivot there. I was one of those people who just was afraid of alcohol and drugs for my since I was 11, because of addiction in my family, and when I like things, it's just hard for me to stop. So I didn't drink, and I still don't drink. But you know, I went to Tin House like a few years ago, and I got on them damn edibles, fam. And my G, like even then, I was, like I said, I'll push that shit away. But even when the first time I did it, I was like, oh my God, you mean motherfuckers across Earth have been feeling this shit whenever they feel like afraid and depressed and anxiety? And I pushed it away. But when times have gotten really, like the beginning of this shit, I mean, I was an edible. Like my nigga, like I was an edible, like completely. The first month of this shit, I didn't open, I had to teach too as an edible, which is hard. But then I realized that like I cannot tap into the places I need to tap into to create, and creating is part of the reason I'm here, and be an edible. Right. So I had to put that shit down. But for the first month, like I was a drug. I wish I could have got a drug test. My shit would have been like off the charts.
Contact high just from touching you.
Just touching me. What about you?
I definitely have never hesitated to drink or get stoned. Yeah, I mean, I'm shook as anyone else that I'm just sitting here drinking water right now, but it was just because I was like, I really want to have a rich conversation. But, your girl loves a cocktail. And yeah, I mean, getting stoned and it's particularly, and I'm like, when, but let's limit it to like this summer, June in particular. It's been important. Yeah, it's just so much because I feel, and I don't know if you feel this way, my mind is racing all the time. I'm just thinking so much, and I'm like news. I just feel like I'm a monster for all of that. And so it is very difficult for me to stop. And so in those moments, particularly where Twitter, you know, and our lives online turns into, here's a traumatic video, here's some news, breaking, I'm in it, you know, it's hard. And so, yeah, at some point I just got to get stoned and watch, you know, I love watching dumb sci-fi movies and animated movies and everything. The other thing that I would say is that this is a privilege, I can afford to do this. I say no. I say I can't do
That's a great answer for you.
Tomorrow. I say I need an extension. And then I spend the day in bed or on the couch with my dog crying or whatever. And I honor it and I take that as seriously as I would sitting at my computer to do the work.
How'd you learn that? Or did you learn it? Did you always have it?
I learned it because the cost of, like you were saying, like addiction, I have like a streak of work addiction, I think, in my family and in my heritage. And so I've gone through periods where I have just worked so hard.
Yes.
And then frankly, working on the book while working at a major media company and, you know, being an executive editor was one of them, where I would work, and then rage. Like, not just like have some drinks, but like rage in response. Because I was so angry that I felt like I wasn't getting to live.
Yes.
And so I just learned that I have to have a balance, because if not, I just go into extremes. Working really hard, and then like setting my hair on fire, you know?
Right.
That is just not sustainable. And so, yeah, and I mean, I don't know, I moved across the country and changed my job, you know, to develop a different rhythm, because being Black in this country is already a full-time job on top of anything else you're doing.
No question. So there's two questions I asked right back to back, and I think we touched on both, but maybe if you can elucidate both a bit more. How do you set boundaries with audiences during question and A sessions online and offline? But online, let's talk about what we, you know. And then the other question is, it sort of says it's existential. What does freedom look like to y'all? Where are you when you picture it, and who are you with? So let's get that second. But how we talk about the online boundaries?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I'm still learning, you know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still navigating that. I mean, I think what helps with question and answers online is you can just not ask the question. They can't, you know, like you know what I mean? Like at an in-person event, you know, there's always the moment where someone can just stand up and say something, and you have to deal with it. Online, it feels like we have, at least in this context, some ways. And also just like more generally, what I always try to do, and I think you do organically so beautifully, is I try to make the boundaries a part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
I try to, and the transgressions, the past transgressions, a part of the conversation before the Q&A, hopefully to tweak or just signal to the audience, like, just in case you were thinking of walking up and touching Kiese, let's talk about how like not great that is.
Right.
Yeah. What about you?
You know, I'm getting better at it, fam. I'm getting, I mean, there's two, it's hard for me to say no for lots of reasons that I probably shouldn't waste people's time talking about. But one of them is just literally, I don't know that I'll have the opportunity to say yes again. You know what I mean? Like, I think when you come from various kinds of precarity, you just think you have to say yes to everything. I'm getting better at that one, because I literally, as you said, you can't do everything. And also, I think the book helped me develop better practices around boundaries, because, you know, you write a book like you write a book like I write, and people think they know you, and people think they know you. They think they have, not just can they touch you, but they think they can ask you things, do things to you online that they may not do regularly. And I think that I've found a balance where I can be kind, and also just be like, but you know, I kind of need my space right now. I understand why you're asking me that, but I kind of can't. Because I want to, I mean, you know, I'm from down here. Like, I want to be kind. I want to be nice. But what about freedom? That was the second part of that question. Like,
what does freedom look like?
Yeah, what does freedom look like, and where are you? And this is what I was trying to ask in the beginning, because you seem like you will seek freedom out and sit in it until it feels unfree, and then go somewhere else. And
that's true.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is it, and it's very true. That's not a myth. That is very true for who I am. I will leave.
Yeah.
I will leave. I've left many times. I changed careers. I changed jobs. I changed genres.
Yeah.
So I think freedom for me is when it's the moment, and then, you know, it's fluid, but I think freedom for me is the moment when I know I am where I am because I want to be there, and I know that if I need or want to leave, I can.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And to me, I don't know if that's a specific person, but, you know, it's like when you're with your friends or whenever, when you're just there because you want to be there. I think a lot of how I express my love, my adoration, is through presence.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so for me, that's freedom. When I feel that my presence is, I don't feel captive. I don't feel obligated. I don't feel like I'm eyeing the exits, but I just know that I'm there because I want to be there, and I can leave when I need to leave, and that will be okay.
And you know what, Saeed? Like, I literally think that is, I think that is one of the most radical, revelatory things about your work. And I don't want to get too artsy, but like, you will also leave a scene. You know, like, you'll leave a scene when motherfuckers like, you know, and you'll trust us. You'll trust us. You'll trust that you gave us enough, and then you maybe come back to it. But as Black folk, and particularly Black Southern folk, who are, I think, whether we admit it or not, always conditioned to try to get chosen because historically we haven't been chosen. It's so hard once you get chosen by an institution, by BuzzFeed, by whatever the fuck, to be like, you know what? This choice ain't healthy for me. I'm gonna dip.
Right.
And so I just think that's one of the most incredible things about you in your work as an artist, but also as a person. Noah Coffey asked, for both of you, what's your editing routine like? Oh, no, she didn't say editing, she said writing. What's your writing routine like? And how has it changed during quarantine? Any advice for rewriting and the rewriting process?
My writing routine changes constantly. It really, I would lie to you if I had a consistent. Sometimes, you know, for months at a time, it's like I got to wake up early in the morning, and if I'm not writing by a certain hour, then it's not going to happen. Other times, I'm like, oh, I'm writing. Generally, I don't write in the evenings because I have major FOMO, so it's hard for me to concentrate if I'm like, what's so and so doing? You know, that's the one thing that I tend generally not to do. But my routine, I will say the only other thing that is really consistent is I have to be by myself. I can't really write. It's been years since I've been able to generate material in a public space, like a cafe or whatever. I can rewrite, I can do edits, I can read, I can make notes, I can research in public, but when it comes to generating new material, I need to be home by myself. So when I sold the book, one of the first changes I made was that I've been living with a roommate quite happily, and I moved into my own apartment. Because even if my roommate was in his room with the door closed, like asleep, I couldn't, it wasn't enough for me. So yeah, I don't know what that is, but you know, whether I'm in a hotel or Airbnb or home, I gotta be by myself. Yeah.
One of the questions in the chat, which is something I'm not in the chat that we really should talk to, is, would you brothers speak to building healthy cis and queer relationships between Black men? Would you speak to building healthy cis and queer relationships between Black men?
Would love to. I mean, you know, it's funny. Actually, earlier today, I'm not being, not trying to be cheeky. I was brushing my teeth, and I was thinking about the way quarantine and being virtual has impacted. And I was like, you know, one of the joys of my life is that I interact with very few straight men now.
Right.
The straight men in my life that I interact with, I can basically count on one hand.
Right.
I include you in this, and they're your treasures as people. Straight Black men, have a lot of shit y'all need to work through.
Right.
And particularly, I think my lens into is like on Twitter, where it just seems like consistently, I just see straight cisgender Black men log on, it seems for the extensive purpose of trashing Black women in particular. I see it so much. It blows. I'm like, who we weren't even, like the other day it was Jill Scott. I was like, no one was even talking about Jill. What, did you see, you know what I'm talking about? And some guy just logged on and just randomly was like, y'all think Jill Scott is attractive?
Right.
It happens every day. And, you know, that's on the continuum to Breonna Taylor. That's on the continuum to, what was it, the 6 Black trans people who were killed during Pride Month alone. There's so much going on, but Black straight men, niggas, there's some stuff to work through. So I right now I'm dealing with it by maintaining the relationships with people I do know and trust and love. Right. But generally, I'm staying away from people that I don't feel safe around, or that other people I care about don't feel safe around.
And that's what I was trying to get at about the like trust. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, I love you. I literally love you, and I don't know that you should trust me, because do you know what I'm saying? Because of what we do, who we are, what I have done, what I have said, and I just think, you know, I think we're both trying to push back against this in our work and have conversations about love, sex, and body that really can like make these relationships healthily possible.
I hope so.
You know what I'm saying? And some of that has to do with, like, if you are a man who considers himself like, you know, a cis heterosexual man, like I think you need to talk about those times in your life when you actually are or were attracted to like different kinds of men. Different, you know what I mean? Like like we have to have those conversations, and we have to push.
The harms.
And the harms. Let's say that again.
Yeah, and talk about the harms as well.
Yes,
you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a defensiveness that we all, but I think particularly straight cisgender men have about even owning the fact that, you know, y'all, many of you, most of you, you know, have hurt people at some point. And I think there's this sense, and I think it's in line with masculinity, that to admit any fault, it's like the broken windows theory, right? Like to admit any fault, like it will all come crumbling down. But the men who are in my life, the straight men who I continue to think of as part of my freedom, part of the reason I believe you're a part of my freedom is because you are willing to own the complexity of your humanity.
Right.
You're willing to listen. You're willing to say, yeah, that was a mistake. That was a trauma. That was a harm I inflicted on someone. And I'm thinking about it and I'm working on it. And I need to see that kind of proactive introspection and openness from straight men before a woman is having to talk to a reporter about what happened. Right. You know what I mean? Before, you know, you have your Nick Cannon, Kevin Hart, Steve Harvey, pick one moment, you know, like maybe just do that work because that is what it is to grow, not necessarily just because that's how you respond to criticism. And it's just too rare still.
Somebody I adore, Ryan Canty, says, no question, I just want to say I love you both. I love you too, Ryan, deeply. One question on here was, what question do you wish you would be asked that you have not been asked? Not today, but, you know, since you've been doing this book tour-ish stuff. That's a tough question.
That's a tough question. And people ask me and I'm always like, I don't know. I mean, because I try to be very thoughtful and intentional about who I have conversations with. So, I mean, I always, you know, enjoy getting to talk about craft elements, you know, so you asking, like, for example, no one has asked about, like, how did the botanist as a subject matter and, you know, in terms of the sections appear in the book. And that's really cool. I love that.
Right.
So yeah, I always think, you know, Black queer artists, like our craft elements aren't discussed as much, but.
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, one of the first questions I asked you that I was so scared to ask you when you were here was about, like, the craft of writing sex, intimacy, and violence. But I think sex, intimacy, and violence are words that we think are craft repellent. Do you know what I'm saying? Like we think of sex scenes. We don't think about what the fuck actually happens and how a scene is said and what moves. We think of violent scenes. We think of intimate scenes. But those words aren't just like proxies for craft. And that's one of the most amazing things about your work generally, but especially in this book, fam. Like, not only does it appear that you have confronted a particular kind of fear to write in it, but it appears that you've, at least in this book, mastered a particular kind of craft that allows you to get into the cracks and crevices and show us this shit that we've never seen before. And in that way, it becomes innovative. And I'm interested in how important innovation is for the work you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. I want to write a book that pushes forward like my mission. I want to write work that makes people, feel safe and colored and humane, through the reading experience. But also I want my writing to be sexy and cool and slick. You know what I mean? And I hope you have those moments, like I remember like the library scene where that dad like walks in and sees me, I just realized, I was like, okay, there are gonna be a lot of sexual encounters. Right. This is gonna happen quite a bit. And this kind of scene is not unusual. It's a very standard kind of gay coming of age moment as I saw it. So I was like, how can I do this differently? And I remember just being absolutely thrilled with the idea to like stop the scene for a moment and focus on how he would see me as he made his way through the library and approaching me. Yeah. And thus, to kind of open it up to like the way white men look at Black men, the way America looks at Black children. Right. As adults, and more adult than we are just because of the history of racism in our culture, and that was exciting to get to do something different and cool, I thought. So like that's a joy.
And as a crafts person, I just want to say my opinion, one of the reasons you can pull off those scenes that like are so rooted in sexuality and fear and violence and all this other shit people want to talk about is in texture, is because they're textured. But the fact that they're textured is not how you pull them off. Like you pull them off because you also texture your mother, someone that we never think about when we think about those particular kinds of scenes. And I think these two textured like forces in the book create this particular kind of depth that allows us to put our body in these positions and make decisions. We have to make a decision about what we think and feel about your mother in that book. Right. We do. And we have to make a decision about what we think and feel about all of these interactions that are violent and sexual and intimate and loving. And we are out of time, fam. But I just want to say, I thank you. I want to thank the Atlanta History Center. Yes. I want to thank Paris. And I really want to thank you, Saeed, for giving us, like, I think a book that we're going to be talking about, toiling with, dealing with for the rest of our lives. If y'all haven't picked up the book, please, I want to ask you one more question. What made you make it? Like, what about the we versus the you? How we versus how you. Can you talk about that?
Because I wanted from the very beginning to establish for readers that whatever was about to happen, like it's not a vacation from your own identity. And I think particularly with memoirs that go into trauma, sometimes they're framed, and especially now where it's like, how can I learn how to not be racist in America? Where's the book I picked up? I wanted a title that kind of implicated all of us from the beginning, to kind of spin that.
I'm so thankful. Thank you, Dartricia. Thank you, Karis. Thank all of y'all for coming out here today. And if you haven't, again, please go pick up both of Saeed's books. I'm supposed to ask you what you're working on next. You want to say about anything about that?
I don't know. I'm writing poems. I might be like, I'm just going to say I'm writing poems. I almost got into trouble.
Thank you, Kate. Yo, please be tender with yourself. Please share. And please love as best you can tonight and the rest of this week and hopefully the rest of your lives. And I think this book will help you along that journey. So thank y'all so much.
I love you so much.
I love you, man. Thank you for asking me.
I'm excited we got to do this.
Thank you.
Thank all of y'all.
Peace, y'all.
All right. Bye, friend.